6 months had passed since Commander Kyle Nash made first contact with humanity, and the Zephyrian Empire was facing its first major military defeat in over 1,000 years. Human forces had not only repelled the invasion of their space, but had launched counterattacks that threatened the core worlds of the Empire itself. Elder Vexathara stood in the ruins of what had once been the military command center on Luxera Prime. The crystal formations were cracked and darkened, damaged by the stress of constant emergency communications from across Zephyrian space. Reports of human advances arrived hourly, each one more alarming than the last. Admiral Helen Parker commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled, a collection of ships that represented everything humanity could build, steal, or salvage from. 6 months of desperate warfare. The fleet was a mixture of purpose-built warships, converted civilian vessels, and captured Zephyrian technology that human engineers had modified beyond recognition. Captain Morrison stood beside her on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the tactical displays that showed Zephyrian defensive positions around their core worlds. The aliens had pulled back their fleets from dozens of occupied territories to protect their homeworlds, abandoning conquests that had taken centuries to achieve. "Admiral," reported Commander Carter, "long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures ahead. The Zephyrians have assembled everything they have left for one final battle." Dr. Brooke studied the sensor data with professional interest. The Zephyrian fleet was impressive by any measure, but she had learned to see weaknesses where others saw strength. Months of analyzing alien technology had taught her that their standardized systems created vulnerabilities that creative minds could exploit. "They're using the same formation patterns we've seen before," she observed. "Concentrated firepower, overlapping defensive fields, logical distribution of resources. It's textbook fleet warfare." "And what's our response?" Admiral Parker asked. Morrison smiled with the confidence of a species that had turned survival into an art form. "We do what we always do, Admiral. We improvise." The human fleet broke formation as it approached the Zephyrian defensive line, scattering into dozens of smaller groups that seemed to move without coordination. To Zephyrian observers, it looked like panic or incompetence. They could not have been more wrong. Commander Kyle Nash watched the approaching human ships from his flagship, trying to understand their tactical plan. His fleet was perfectly positioned to destroy the scattered human forces in detail, but something about their approach made him nervous. Sub-Commander Rin Ara had spent months studying human psychology, and she recognized what the aliens were seeing. "Commander, they are not retreating or panicking. This is a deliberate strategy." "What strategy?" Kyle Nash demanded. "They have divided their forces against a superior enemy. It is tactical suicide." But Rin Ara had learned to never underestimate human creativity. "That assumes they are following conventional tactical doctrine, sir. Humans do not think conventionally. Battle began when engineer Tony Garcia's modified ships emerged from the corona of the local star, their hulls glowing with heat but their weapons fully charged. The Zephyrians had not expected humans to use stellar radiation as camouflage, and Garcia's surprise attack destroyed 3 capital ships before the aliens could react. Pilot Maria Santos led a squadron of fighters through the Zephyrian formation, at speeds that should have been impossible for organic pilots to survive. Her ships moved like a school of fish, constantly changing direction and speed in patterns that confused the alien targeting systems. "How are they coordinating those movements?" Keel Nash asked his tactical officer. "Unknown, sir. There are no command signals between their ships. Each pilot seems to be making independent decisions, but somehow they are working together perfectly. The answer would have horrified Kyle Nash if he had understood it. The human pilots were not following a plan. They were improvising together, using intuition and creativity to stay one step ahead of logical military doctrine. Colonel Sandra Price commanded the human ground assault on the Zephyrian supply depot, leading troops who had learned to fight with equipment they barely understood against enemies who should have been impossible to defeat. Her soldiers used captured alien weapons in ways their designers never intended, turning defensive systems into offensive weapons and mining tools into instruments of war. The most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Dr. Brooks had been working with a team of human scientists to develop new weapons based on Zephyrian technology, but their breakthrough was not a weapon at all. It was a computer virus that turned the aliens' own standardized systems against them. All Zephyrian ships use the same operating protocols, she explained to Admiral Parker as the virus spread through the enemy fleet. Once our program infiltrates their network, it spreads to every connected system. We are not just attacking their ships. We are attacking their entire technological infrastructure. The virus was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to destroy Zephyrian systems, it modified them to work slightly less efficiently. Power levels dropped by small percentages, targeting systems became marginally less accurate, and networks experienced brief delays. Each individual effect was minor, but combined they created cascading failures throughout the alien fleet. Captain Morrison watched as Zephyrian ships began to malfunction in subtle but critical ways. Their weapons missed targets they should have hit easily. Their shields failed at moments when they were most needed. Their engines lost power just as they tried to maneuver away from human attacks. "It is brilliant," he said with admiration for Dr. Brooks' work. "We are not overpowering them, we are making them overpower themselves." Commander Kyle Nash realized with growing horror that his perfect fleet was falling apart not because of superior human technology, but because humans had turned Zephyrian perfection into a weakness. The standardization that made his ships efficient had also made them vulnerable to attacks that targeted their common systems. But the most terrifying moment came when Kyle Nash understood that humans were still learning. Even as the battle raged around them, human ships were analyzing Zephyrian responses and adapting their tactics in real time. Every alien countermeasure was met with new human innovations within minutes. "Sir," Rhaenyra reported with barely controlled panic, "the humans are not just winning this battle. They are studying us while they fight. Every technique we use against them makes them stronger." The realization broke something fundamental in Kyle Nash's worldview. His empire had conquered dozens of species through superior technology and overwhelming force. But humans had turned their own strength against them, using Zephyrian advantages as weapons in human hands. Elder Vexthara arrived at the battle zone in a small diplomatic vessel, risking her life to witness the catastrophe that her warnings had failed to prevent. She watched human forces systematically dismantle the greatest fleet the Zephyrian Empire had ever assembled, using tactics that seemed to violate every principle of logical warfare. The human ships moved like living things, constantly adapting to new threats and finding weaknesses that should not have existed. Their crews fought with a coordination that came not from rigid discipline, but from shared purpose and mutual trust. "Open a communication channel to the human fleet," she ordered her ship's captain. "Elder," the captain protested, "they are destroying our forces." "Why would they listen to diplomatic overtures now?" "Because," Vexthara replied sadly, "humans fight to win, not to destroy. If we offer them victory, they might accept it. The message that went out to Admiral Parker was simple and direct. The Zephyrian Empire requested immediate cessation of hostilities and wished to negotiate terms of surrender. The response came from Captain Morrison himself, and his words would be remembered in both human and Zephyrian history for generations to come. We accept your request for negotiations, Elder Vexthara, but understand that this ends only when we are certain it will never happen again. The negotiations took place aboard the UES Liberty, with Elder Vexthara facing Admiral Parker across a table that represented the complete reversal of the power balance in this region of space. The terms that emerged were not harsh by human standards, but they were comprehensive. First, all Zephyrian forces would withdraw immediately from human space and never return without explicit invitation. Second, the Zephyrian Empire would recognize complete human sovereignty over all territories currently under human control. Third, and most importantly, the Zephyrians would share the true history of their ancient warnings about humans with any species that might consider challenging humanity in the future. Why that last condition? Vexthara asked. Surely you do not want other species to fear you? Admiral Parker's response showed the complexity of human psychology that had made them so dangerous to underestimate. We do not want to be feared, Elder. But if fear prevents future conflicts like this one, then fear serves the cause of peace. Dr. Brooks added her own perspective, speaking as both scientist and survivor of months of desperate warfare. We prefer to be friends with our neighbors, but if friendship is not possible, then respect will suffice. And if the war that Commander Kyle Nash expected to last days had now stretched into 3 months, and the situation was growing worse for the Zephyrian Empire with each passing week. Reports from the front lines described impossible human tactics and technologies that seemed to evolve faster than military analysts could study them. On Luxara Prime, Elder Vexthara stood before an emergency session of the full Elder Council. The crystal chamber buzzed with worried conversations as reports from the Sol system continued to arrive. What had begun as an unauthorized first contact mission had become a full-scale conflict that threatened the stability of the entire empire. The situation is worse than our most pessimistic projections, reported Elder Zixandra, head of military intelligence. Commander Kyle Nash's fleet has lost 30% of its ships, and the humans show no signs of slowing their advance into our territory. Shocked murmurs filled the chamber. A 30% loss rate against a primitive species was unthinkable. The Zephyrian military had conquered dozens of worlds with minimal casualties. How could humans, with their inferior technology, be inflicting such damage? Vexthara activated the ancient archives, projecting holographic records that had not been seen for thousands of years. The complete historical files about human observation filled the chamber with data that made even the oldest elders uncomfortable. These records were sealed because our ancestors believed the knowledge was too dangerous to share freely, she explained. But recent events have forced us to confront what they learned about human psychology and behavior. The historical data painted a terrifying picture. Ancient Zephyrian scouts had observed humans during their medieval period, documenting behaviors that defied every model of rational species development. Even primitive humans showed the same disturbing qualities that modern humans displayed. They fought harder when outnumbered, they refused to surrender even when defeat was certain, and they turned every disadvantage into a weapon. Look at this. Report from the year 847 of their calendar, Vexthara said, highlighting a section of ancient text. Our scouts observed a human settlement under attack by a vastly superior force. Logic dictated immediate surrender to minimize casualties. Instead, the humans fought until their walls were breached, then continued fighting in the streets. When their weapons were destroyed, they used tools and furniture. When those were gone, they used their bare hands. Elder Kixmira, one of the youngest council members, studied the data with growing alarm. The report says they kept fighting even after their leaders were killed. How is that possible without command structure? Because humans do not fight for their leaders, Vexathara replied. They fight for concepts that exist only in their minds: freedom, honor, family, justice. These ideas cannot be killed or captured, so humans will continue fighting to defend them no matter what the cost. The council reviewed more historical records, each one more disturbing than the last. Humans who walked into certain death to save. Strangers. Human soldiers who continued fighting with fatal wounds rather than accept medical treatment from enemies. Human civilians who destroyed their own possessions rather than let invaders claim them. The most dangerous quality, Vexathera continued, is their ability to learn and adapt during conflict. Other species develop tactics over generations. Humans modify their approach within days or even hours of encountering new challenges. As if to prove her point, reports arrived from the front lines describing new human technologies that had appeared seemingly overnight. Human ships were now using modified Zephyrian engines that somehow produced more power than the original designs. Human weapons incorporated alien materials in ways that Zephyrian engineers claimed should be impossible. Back in the Sol system, Dr. Lisa Brooks worked around the clock in a converted laboratory aboard the UES Liberty. The space around her was filled with pieces of captured Zephyrian technology that she and her team were reverse engineering at a pace that amazed even her. The power coupling system is actually quite elegant, she explained to engineer Tony Garcia. They use crystalline matrices to focus energy in ways we never considered. But if we modify the resonance frequency like this, we can get 40% more output than their original design. Garcia studied her modifications with professional admiration. Human engineers had always been good at improving existing technology, but Brooks was reinventing alien science faster than most species could understand it. Her changes were not just functional improvements. They were creative leaps that pushed the technology beyond what its creators had imagined possible. Captain. Morrison reviewed the latest tactical reports from Admiral Parker, and the news was both encouraging and concerning. Human forces were advancing steadily through Zephyrian space, but their success was creating new problems. "We're winning battles we have no right to win," Admiral Parker reported during their daily briefing. "But each victory brings us closer to the Zephyrian core worlds, and that means facing larger fleets with more advanced technology." Lieutenant Carter had been promoted to commander and now led a squadron of modified human ships. His experiences in combat had taught him lessons that no military academy could provide. "Admiral," he said, "the Zephyrians fight like they're following a textbook. Same formations, same tactics, same responses to every situation. Once you figure out their patterns, they become predictable." "And what about us?" Morrison asked. Carter smiled grimly. "We don't have patterns, sir. Every battle is different because every human ship captain finds their own way to fight. The aliens can't predict us because we're not even sure what we're going to do until we do it." This unpredictability was exactly what made humans so dangerous to the Zephyrian Empire. Their military doctrine was based on logical, systematic approaches to warfare. Humans fought with creativity and intuition that defied systematic analysis. Pilot Maria Santos had become something of a legend among both human and Zephyrian forces. Her flying style violated every principle of safe spacecraft operation, yet she consistently achieved impossible victories against superior numbers. During the battle for the Proxima Research Station, she flew her ship through the corona of a star to avoid enemy detection, using solar radiation to mask her approach. The maneuver should have destroyed her ship, but Santos had calculated exactly how long she could survive in the stellar environment. "The aliens think space is empty," she explained to her squadron afterward. "But it's full of things you can use if you're desperate enough and crazy enough to try." Sub-Commander Rin Ara had been monitoring human communications for months, trying to understand how they coordinated their seemingly chaotic military operations. What she discovered was more disturbing than the lack of central control. Humans were sharing tactical innovations across their entire fleet in real time. A new weapon design developed on Earth would appear on human ships throughout the war zone within days. Tactical discoveries made by individual pilots were immediately adopted by other units. The entire human military seemed to function as a single adaptive organism, learning and evolving at a rate that made Zephyrian strategic planning impossible. "Commander Nash," she reported during their latest strategy meeting, "we need to consider the possibility that we cannot win this conflict through conventional means." Kyle Nash's pride had been shattered by months of defeats, but he was not ready to admit that humans were superior to Zephyrians. "What do you suggest, Sub-Commander? That we surrender to a species that barely understands interstellar travel?" "I suggest we study these humans more carefully before we underestimate them further," Rinara replied. "They have qualities that our military doctrine does not account for." The breakthrough moment came when Rinara intercepted human communications. During the battle for Kepler Station, she heard Administrator Ben Hayes coordinating the defense using mining equipment and civilian ships, but his words revealed something that made her understand the true nature of human psychology. When told the situation was hopeless, she reported, "To the Elder Council, the human administrator said, 'Then we'll have to make hope. Not find hope or restore hope, but make hope.' They believe they can create positive outcomes through will and effort alone." Elder Vexathara felt a chill as she heard this report. The ancient warnings had mentioned this quality, but she had not fully understood its implications until now. Humans did not just refuse to accept defeat, they refused to accept that defeat was even possible. The most terrifying example came during the siege of the research vessel UES Discovery. Surrounded by 12 Zephyrian warships and facing certain destruction, the human crew did not attempt to surrender or escape. Instead, they began broadcasting detailed technical specifications for every human weapon and defense system. Why would they reveal military secrets when facing capture? Nash asked his intelligence officers. The answer came from Dr. Brooks herself, whose voice was intercepted during the broadcast. "If we're going down, we're taking as many of you with us as possible, and we're making sure every human ship knows exactly how to hurt you." The Discovery was destroyed, but its sacrifice allowed other human ships to adapt their tactics based on the technical data the crew had broadcast. Even in death, humans found ways to damage their enemies and help. The cultural exchange between humans and Zephyrians continued for 2 weeks, and both sides seemed pleased with the progress. Captain Morrison had arranged for additional human ships to join the UES Horizon, creating a small fleet that could properly represent Earth during these historic negotiations. Admiral Helen Parker arrived aboard the UES Liberty, bringing with her a team of diplomats and scientists who specialized in first contact protocols. Dr. Brooks worked closely with Zephyrian scientists, sharing human discoveries in physics and biology, while learning about alien approaches to the same problems. The exchange of knowledge was fascinating, but she noticed that the Zephyrians seemed more interested in human military technology than in pure science. Commander Keelnash had expanded his own fleet as well, calling in ships from nearby Zephyrian territories without informing the Elder Council. He justified this as necessary security for such an important diplomatic mission, but Sub-Commander Rin Ara suspected his real motives were different. The breakthrough moment came when Kyle Nash requested permission to visit Earth itself. He wanted to see human civilization firsthand, to understand how humans lived and worked together. Morrison was honored by the request and began making arrangements for the first alien visit to Earth in recorded history. But Admiral Parker was more cautious than Morrison. She had spent her career dealing with hostile alien species in theoretical scenarios, and something about the Zephyrians made her nervous. Their questions focused too much on human population centers, military installations, and resource production. Facilities. Captain Morrison, she said during a private meeting aboard the Liberty, I think we need to be more careful about what information we share with our new friends. Morrison looked surprised. Admiral, they've been completely open with us. They've shared their technology, their history, even their star charts. Surely we can trust them with basic information about Earth. Have they really been completely open? Parker asked. Dr. Brooks tells me their answers about their government structure are vague. Lieutenant Carter reports that their weapons systems are far more advanced than they initially claimed, and I've noticed they avoid discussing their territorial boundaries in detail. Morrison considered this carefully. The Admiral had a point, but he was reluctant to damage the positive relationship they had built with humanity's first alien contact. Lieutenant Carter joined the discussion, bringing new intelligence that concerned him greatly. Admiral, I've been analyzing the Zephyrian fleet composition. They have 3 times as many ships here as they initially claimed, and most of them are military vessels designed for conquest rather than exploration. The revelation changed the tone of the negotiations dramatically. When Morrison confronted Keelnash about the hidden ships, the Zephyrian commander finally revealed his true intentions. Captain Morrison, Kyle Nash said during their next meeting, I believe it is time for complete honesty between our species. The Zephyrian Empire has been expanding peacefully for centuries, bringing order and prosperity to dozens of worlds. We would like to offer humanity the same opportunity. Morrison felt a chill run through him. What exactly are you offering, Commander? Membership in our empire, Kyle Nash replied smoothly. Human worlds would become part of our territory, protected by our fleets and governed by our laws. In return, humans would contribute their resources and unique talents to the greater good of the empire. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Brooks stared at the alien commander in shock, while Carter's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. Morrison struggled to keep his voice calm as he responded. And if humanity declines this generous offer? Kyle Nash's expression remained friendly, but his tone carried an unmistakable threat. I hope that will not be necessary to discuss. Captain, most species find the benefits of Imperial membership far outweigh any concerns about independence. Morrison looked around the alien ship that had seemed so welcoming just moments before. Now it felt like a trap, and he realized that humanity had walked into it willingly. I need to discuss this with my government, he said carefully. This is not a decision I can make alone. Of course, Kyle Nash agreed. Take all the time you need. My fleet will remain here to provide protection while you consider our offer. When Morrison returned to the human ships, he immediately called an emergency meeting with Admiral Parker and the other senior officers. The situation had changed from first contact to potential invasion in a matter of minutes. How many ships do they really have? Parker asked Lieutenant Carter. At least 30, Admiral. Maybe more using stealth technology we can't detect. Each one could destroy our entire fleet without taking damage. Dr. Brooks looked devastated. I can't believe they deceived us so completely. They seemed so genuinely interested in scientific exchange. They were interested, Morrison replied grimly, just not for the reasons we thought. They were studying us, learning our capabilities and weaknesses. Admiral Parker activated the ship's secure communications system and sent an emergency message to Earth. Within hours, the response came back from the United Earth government. Humanity rejected the Zephyrian offer of Imperial membership and demanded immediate withdrawal of alien forces from the Sol system. Morrison delivered the message to kill Nash personally, expecting anger or disappointment. Instead, the Zephyrian commander seemed almost amused by humanity's response. You refuse our protection and guidance? Kyle Nash asked. Captain, your species has barely left its home star system. Our empire spans dozens of worlds and controls, resources beyond your imagination. You cannot seriously believe you can stand against us. Morrison's response shocked the alien commander to his core. Commander Kyle Nash, you're welcome to try, but I should warn you. We don't have a great track record with surrender. The words were spoken calmly, almost casually, but something in Morrison's tone made Rinara take a step backward. She had heard that same quality in the voices of predators back on her homeworld, the quiet confidence of creatures that feared nothing because they had nothing left to lose. Kyle Nash, however, interpreted Morrison's response as primitive bravado. He had seen it before in other species, the desperate bluster of the weak when confronted by the strong. It would pass quickly once the humans saw the true power of the Zephyrian fleet. Very well, Captain, he said with what he thought was patience. Perhaps a demonstration will help you understand the situation more clearly. The Zephyrian fleet moved to attack human settlements on the outer colonies, expecting quick surrender once the colonists saw the overwhelming force arrayed against them. Kyle Nash chose Kepler Station as his first target, a mining colony with minimal defenses and a small population. It should have been an easy victory that would convince Earth to accept Imperial membership. Colony Administrator Ben Hayes received the surrender demand with surprising calm. His response confused the Zephyrian commander even more than Morrison's had. Commander Kyle Nash, Hayes broadcast back, I appreciate the warning, but we're going to have to decline your offer. We've got work to do here. Kyle Nash was baffled. The human colony had no military ships, no significant weapons, and no chance of survival against his fleet. Yet the administrator spoke as if the situation was merely an inconvenience rather than a death sentence. Administrator Hayes, Kyle Nash replied, perhaps you do not understand. My fleet has the power to destroy your entire colony. Surrender now, and your people will be relocated safely to other worlds under Imperial protection. Hayes's response came back immediately. Oh, we understand perfectly, Commander. But you see, we've got quotas to meet, families to feed, and a life we've built here. If you want to take that away from us, you'll have to fight for it. And I should mention, miners know a thing or two about explosives. The threat was absurd. Mining explosives could not damage military starships. Yet something about the human's tone made Rin-Ara check her ship's defensive systems. The confidence in Hayes's voice was not the bravado of someone making empty threats. When the Zephyrian attack began, Kyla Nash expected it to last minutes. Instead, it stretched into hours as the humans turned every piece of mining equipment into a weapon. They used explosive charges to create asteroid fields that damaged attacking ships. They converted ore haulers into improvised warships. They fought with a creativity and determination that defied all military logic. Most shocking of all, when the situation became hopeless, the humans did not surrender. Instead, they fought harder. Ben Hayes coordinated the defense using mining, equipment, and civilian ships, turning the colony's industrial infrastructure into a complex weapons system. "Commander," one of Kyle Nash's officers reported, "the humans are using their fusion reactors as weapons. They're threatening to overload them if we approach the main settlement." "They're bluffing," Kyle Nash replied, but his confidence was shaken. No species would destroy their own colony to deny it to an enemy. Rin-Ara was monitoring human communications, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The colonists were not bluffing. They were actually preparing to destroy everything they had built rather than let it fall into alien hands. More terrifying still, they seemed to consider this a reasonable response to the situation. 3 weeks had passed since the council meeting, and Commander Kyle Nash had made his decision. His personal fleet of 12 ships hung in space at the edge of Zephyrian territory, their sleek forms invisible to most sensors thanks to advanced cloaking technology. Each vessel carried enough firepower to level a small moon, and their crews were among the best in the Empire. Sub-Commander Rin-Ara stood beside Kyle Nash on the bridge of his flagship, watching the star charts that showed their intended destination. Her green skin showed patterns of concern that she tried to hide, but Kyle Nash had known her long enough to read her emotions easily. "You still have doubts about this mission?" he said without looking at her. Rin-Ara chose her words carefully. "Commander, the Elder Council gave specific orders that the Sol system was to remain off-limits. By traveling there, we risk not only our careers, but potentially our lives." Kel Nash turned to face her, his expression confident and determined. "The Elder Council fears shadows from the past. They would have us hide behind their ancient warnings while opportunities pass us by. The humans have been sending signals across space for decades. They are clearly trying to make contact with other species. Why should we not be the ones to answer?" "Because our ancestors warned us not to," Rin-Ara replied quietly. "Our ancestors also thought the stars were unreachable," Kyle Nash countered. "They believed many things that we now know to be false. Perhaps their fear of humans was just another mistake." The fleet began its journey toward the Sol system, using routes that would keep them hidden from other Zephyrian ships. Kyle Nash had planned this expedition carefully, choosing crew members who were loyal to him personally rather than to the Elder Council. If his mission succeeded, he would be hailed as a visionary. If it failed, he would face the consequences alone. The journey took several days, during which time Kyle Nash studied everything the Zephyrians knew about humans. The information was limited and old, but it painted a picture of a species that had survived multiple extinction events on their homeworld: ice ages, asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, and other disasters that should have wiped them out completely. Yet somehow, they had not only survived, but thrived. Their technology was advancing rapidly. In just a few centuries, they had gone from using primitive tools to building spacecraft capable of interstellar travel. Their mathematical and scientific knowledge was impressive for such a young species. But what struck Kilnash most was their art and literature, which seemed to celebrate struggle and adversity rather than fear it. Meanwhile, on the UES horizon, Captain Morrison and his crew continued their exploration of the outer solar system. They had detected several anomalies over the past few days, gravitational disturbances that suggested the presence of large objects moving through space. But their sensors could not pinpoint exactly what was causing these disturbances. Dr. Brooks had been working around the clock, trying to analyze the unusual readings. Her computer models suggested that something was actively masking its presence, using technology far more advanced than anything humans had developed. The implications were both exciting and terrifying. "Captain," she called from her station, "I'm getting some very strange readings on the long-range sensors. It looks like there are multiple objects moving in formation about half a light-year away." Morrison hurried to her station, studying the data displays with growing concern. The objects were massive, easily the size of human spacecraft, but they seemed to be invisible to direct observation. Only their gravitational effects revealed their presence. Lieutenant Carter joined them, his hand resting on his sidearm out of habit. "Could be a natural phenomenon," he suggested. "Maybe some kind of cosmic debris field." "Debris doesn't move in formation," Brooks replied, "and it doesn't maintain precise distances from each other. These objects are under intelligent control." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, but the reality of first contact was more frightening than exciting. Unknown aliens with advanced technology could be explorers like themselves, or they could be something far more dangerous. "Red alert," he ordered. "All hands to battle stations. Dr. Brooks, keep monitoring those signals. Carter, I want all weapons. Systems online and ready." The UES Horizon transformed from an exploration vessel into a warship within minutes. Crew members ran to their stations, preparing for the possibility of combat with an unknown enemy. The ship's armor plating shifted into defensive configurations, and its weapons emerged from hidden compartments. Kilnash watched the human ship's transformation with interest. His fleet had been observing the vessel for 2 days, studying its design and capabilities. The humans were more advanced than he had expected, but their technology still seemed primitive compared to Zephyrian standards. "They have detected our presence," Rin-Ara reported from her sensor station. "Their ship is powering weapons and moving into a defensive posture." "Impressive," Kyle Nash admitted. "Their sensors are better than our intelligence reports suggested, but they still cannot see us directly." He studied the human vessel more closely. It was smaller than his flagship, but appeared to be heavily armed for its size. The humans had clearly designed it for both exploration and combat, suggesting they expected to encounter dangers in space. "Commander," one of his officers called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the human ship. They are broadcasting on multiple frequencies." "Put it through the translators," Kyle Nash ordered. The message that came through was simple but profound. Mathematical sequences, universal constants, and basic scientific principles that any intelligent species would recognize. The humans were trying to establish communication, proving they understood the basics of interstellar contact protocols. Morrison stood on the bridge, waiting for any response to their signals. The decision to broadcast had not been easy. If the unknown objects were hostile, revealing their position and intentions could be a fatal mistake. But if they were peaceful explorers like humanity, this could be the most important moment in human history. "Still no response, Captain," the communications officer reported. But something is happening to those gravitational anomalies. They seem to be changing position. Morrison watched the tactical display as the unknown objects moved closer to the horizon. Whatever was out there had clearly received their message and was responding to it. The question was whether that response would be friendly or hostile. Kyle Nash made his decision. Against the protests of Rin Ara and several other officers, he ordered his ship to decloak and respond to the human transmission. The massive Zephyrian vessel shimmered into view, its crystal hull gleaming in the light of distant stars. The moment his ship became visible, warning signals began broadcasting across Zephyrian space. Ancient beacons that had remained silent for thousands of years suddenly activated, sending emergency messages to every Zephyrian world. The forbidden contact had been made. On Luxara Prime, Elder Vexithara felt the vibrations through the crystal structures of her tower. The warning beacons could only mean one thing: someone had violated the ancient prohibition against contact with humans. Her worst fears were becoming reality. She rushed to the communication center, where technicians were frantically trying to trace the source of the beacon signals. When they pinpointed the location, Vexithara's blood turned cold. Commander Keel Nash had taken his fleet to the Sol system. "Send an immediate recall order," she commanded. "All ships in that region are to return to Zephyrian space immediately." But even as she gave the order, she knew it was probably too late. The contact had been made. The ancient warnings had been ignored. Now they would all discover why their ancestors had feared the humans so much. Back near Earth, Morrison stared at the alien ship that had suddenly appeared on his screens. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Its design seemed to blend technology with art, creating something that was both functional and elegant. "Open a channel!" he ordered, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Horizon," he broadcast. "We come in peace and friendship. We welcome you to our star system." The response came quickly, translated by computers that seemed far more advanced than anything humans possessed. The voice that spoke was clearly alien, but the words were warm and welcoming. "Greetings, Captain Morrison. I am Commander Kyle Nash of the Zephyrian Empire. We too come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship between our peoples." Dr. Brooks could barely contain her excitement as she recorded every detail of the historic exchange. This was the moment humanity had dreamed of for centuries, proof that intelligent life existed beyond Earth and that peaceful contact was possible. But Lieutenant Carter remained suspicious. The alien ship was clearly more advanced than the Horizon, and its weapon systems were far beyond human understanding. If these Zephyrians had hostile intentions, humanity would be completely defenseless against them. Kayla Nash invited Morrison to bring a small delegation aboard his ship for formal first contact ceremonies. After careful consideration, Morrison agreed, taking Dr. Brooks and Carter with him in a shuttle to the alien vessel. The crystal spires of Luxara Prime reached toward the purple sky like frozen lightning. Inside the tallest tower, the Zephyrian Council of Elders gathered in their sacred chamber. The walls hummed with ancient energy, displaying holographic records that stretched back thousands of years. Elder Vexithara stood at the center of the circular room, her silver skin shimmering under the soft glow of the crystal formations above. The younger Zephyrians shifted nervously in their floating seats. They had been summoned to hear the old warnings again, the same stories their ancestors had passed down for generations. Most of them thought these meetings were a waste of time. The galaxy had changed since those ancient days. Technology had advanced. The old fears seemed foolish now. Vexthara raised her 4 arms and silence fell across the chamber. Her voice carried the weight of centuries as she began to speak. The holographic displays around them flickered to life, showing star maps and ancient symbols that few could read anymore. Long ago, our scouts traveled to the far edges of the galaxy, she said. They found many worlds, many species. Most were peaceful. Some were aggressive. All could be understood through logic and reason. But there was one world that our ancestors marked with the deepest warning. A blue planet orbiting a yellow star. A world inhabited by creatures called humans. Commander Kyle Nash, sitting near the front of the gathering, rolled his eyes. He was young for a Zephyrian, barely 300 years old. His dark blue skin showed the patterns of his military rank, and his weapons gleamed at his side. He had heard these stories before, and they made no sense to him. How could one primitive species be more dangerous than the great war fleets they had defeated in the past? The records are incomplete, Vexthara continued, but what remains tells us enough. These humans do not think like other species. When faced with superior force, they do not surrender. When logic demands retreat, they advance. When death seems certain, they find ways to survive that should not be possible. The holographic display showed fragments of ancient text. The symbols were old, from a time when the Zephyrian language was different. Most of the younger council members could not read them, but Vexthara translated as she pointed to each line. They grow stronger when faced with extinction, she read. They turn impossible odds into victories through sheer will. They do not calculate chances of survival. They calculate how much damage they can cause before they fall. Kyle Nash stood up, his frustration clear in his voice. Elder Vexthara, with respect, these are just old stories. Our ancestors were afraid of many things that we now understand. They feared the void between stars until we learned to travel through it. They feared other species until we learned to communicate with them. Perhaps they simply did not understand these humans. Several other young Zephyrians nodded in agreement. The old warnings seemed like superstition in an age of advanced science and technology. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems. Their ships could destroy planets. Their weapons could tear holes in space itself. What could one primitive species do against such power? Vexthara's eyes grew sad as she looked at the younger generation. She had expected this reaction. Each generation questioned the wisdom of the past. But some wisdom existed for good reasons. You think our ancestors were foolish, she said. You believe that superior technology ensures victory, but the records speak of something else. Something that technology cannot defeat. The humans possess a quality that makes them uniquely dangerous. They refuse to accept that anything is impossible. The holographic display changed, showing star charts from the edge of Zephyrian space. Red markers indicated the location of the Sol system, where the human homeworld waited. It was far from Zephyrian territory, separated by vast distances and dangerous regions of space. For this reason, Vexthara said, our ancestors declared the Sol system forbidden. No Zephyrian ship was to approach that region. No contact was to be made with the humans. This law has protected our people for thousands of years. Kyle Nash laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Protected us from what? From learning about new technology? From making new allies? Elder, I have studied the intercepted signals from that region. These humans have barely left their own star system. Their ships are primitive. Their weapons are simple. They pose no threat to our empire. And yet the warnings remain, Vexithara replied firmly. Written in the blood of those who came before us. Every species that has ignored such warnings has paid a price, but Keelnash was not listening anymore. In his mind, he was already planning an expedition to the Sol system. His research teams had been tracking human signals for months. They had detected unusual energy patterns that suggested the humans were developing faster than expected. If the Zephyrians could make contact first, they could guide human development. They could gain access to human resources and territory. They could expand their empire peacefully. Meanwhile, in a distant corner of the galaxy, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon. The ship was humanity's pride, the first vessel designed for deep space exploration beyond the Sol system. Its hull gleamed with new armor plating, and its engines hummed with power that human engineers had spent decades perfecting. Dr. Lisa Brooks worked at her station nearby, monitoring the long-range sensors for any sign of alien life. She had dedicated her career to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Every day brought new hope that today might be the day humanity finally found proof they were not alone in the universe. Lieutenant Ryan Carter checked the ship's defensive systems for the third time that day. He was responsible for protecting the crew and the ship from any threats they might encounter. The unknown regions of space held many dangers, from radiation storms to asteroid fields. But Carter was most concerned about the possibility of hostile alien contact. Any new signals today, Doctor? Morrison asked as he reviewed the ship's course. Brooks shook her head, her red hair catching the light from her computer screens. Nothing yet, Captain, but I'm detecting some unusual gravitational fluctuations about 2 light years ahead. It could be natural phenomena, or it could be something artificial. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. The Horizon was equipped with the most advanced sensors humanity had ever built, but they still had much to learn about the galaxy around them. Every new discovery brought questions that led to even more questions. Carter looked up from his console with a frown. Captain, I'm seeing some irregularities in the background radiation patterns. It's almost like something is moving out there, something big enough to bend space around it. Could be a black hole, Morrison suggested, or maybe a neutron star. We haven't mapped yet. Maybe, Carter replied, but his expression remained concerned. Or maybe we're not as alone out here as we thought. Back on Luxara Prime, the council meeting was ending. The younger Zephyrians filed out of the chamber, many of them shaking their heads at what they saw as outdated fears. But Keelnash lingered, behind, studying the ancient star charts with new interest. Vexithara approached him, her footsteps silent on the crystal floor. I know what you are thinking, young commander, but some doors should remain closed. Keelnash turned to face her, his expression determined. Elder with respect, you ask us to fear shadows from the past. The galaxy has changed. We have changed. Perhaps it is time to test whether these old warnings still have meaning. And if you are wrong? Vexithara asked quietly. Keelnash smiled confidently. Then we will have gained a new ally or conquered a new territory. Either outcome benefits our empire. Vexithara watched him leave the chamber, her heart heavy with worry. She had seen that same confidence in other young leaders throughout the centuries. Most had learned wisdom through experience, but some lessons came at too high a price to learn. She turned back to the ancient records, searching through files that had not been opened in generations. Somewhere in those vast archives lay the complete story of why her ancestors had feared the humans so much. But the records were fragmented, scattered across different time periods and storage systems. What she found made her blood run cold, references to human adaptability that defied all logic. Reports of human survivors doing impossible things when their backs were against the wall. Warnings written by Zephyrian scouts who had observed human behavior from a distance. One fragment stood out among the rest, written in the oldest form of their language. They do not fight to win. They fight to ensure their enemies lose. Vexathera closed the files and sealed them away. Some knowledge was too dangerous to share, especially with young commanders who already believed they knew better than their elders. But as she left the chamber, she could not shake the feeling that the ancient warnings were about to be tested once again.